where we use quantum information to construct unclonable primitives. And one of the main ingredients we use is the following theorem from quantum information, the so-called non-cloning theorem, that says that if you're given an unknown quantum state, even an unbounded adversary cannot create two copies of it. And this very simple principle or theorem allows us to create many applications of crypto. That's impossible classically because we can, of course, just create any number of copies of a classical piece of information. And the Unclonable crypto, one of the first applications was the seminal work of Wiesner in 1983, constructing quantum money from quantum states. Later generalized to the so-called public key quantum money setting, where we don't need the involvement of a trusted bank to verify banknotes. Anyone can verify any banknote using a public classical key. Later also, Aaronson in 2009 defined copy protection for programs, which is another application of quantum information, where we are trying to basically encode a program as a quantum state that cannot be cloned. Later, we also have unclonable encryption, copy protection for cryptographic keys, which is the topic of the talk today. And we also have a recently proposed application called Unbounded and local operations and classical communication leakage resilience for cryptographic primitives, which is again something that is impossible classically. We construct various primitives like public key encryption, where the secret key is a quantum state, and no matter how long a classical leakage and adversary obtains on this secret key, the security of the public key encryption system is not compromised, which is again possible classically because if you don't impose any bounds on the size of the leakage, you can just download the whole secret key. Right. So let's start by defining our setting. We first start by defining copy protection for decryption keys of the public key encryption scheme. Basically, we will require that we have a public key encryption system with a classical public key and a quantum secret key, such that no polytime adversary can create two copies or two working secret keys from a single quantum secret key. More formally, we imagine the following game-based definition, where we have a challenger that samples the classical public key and the protected secret key, and we hand them over to Alice. And Alice produces two quantum systems or quantum registers, R1, R2, that are possibly entangled. And we give R1 to Bob and R2 to Charlie. And we require that Bob and Charlie cannot communicate. And this is, of course, a requirement because otherwise Bob and Charlie could just communicate with each other to decrypt the individual challenge ciphertexts that they receive. So we require no communication between them. And after the split, we present Bob and Charlie with some challenge ciphertexts, and we require them to decrypt these challenge ciphertexts. And we can define this game in like two flavors. First of all, the first one is the so-called CPA style unclonable decryption keys, where we present Bob and Charlie with encryptions of either M0 or M1, and we require them to output their guesses for either M0 or M1 as encrypted. And in the second flavor, which we can call unpredictability security or one-wayness, maybe, you present Bob and Charlie with encryptions of a sufficiently long random message, and we require them to guess the underlying message in full. So we have the usual correctness requirement, and to formulate the security requirement we have is that the probability of Bob and Charlie both guessing the challenge bits simultaneously is at most 1/2 plus negligible. And maybe just 1/2 plus negligible might seem a little bit off in the sense that in the usual PKE security game, the baseline success probability is 1/2. You can randomly guess the challenge bit. But here, in this case, we have two different adversaries that are required to be both correct at the same time. So you might think that 1/4 might be the baseline success probability here. But trivial attack is for Alice to just hand over her key to Bob, and Charlie can just randomly guess his challenge bit while Bob uses his honest key to honestly decrypt the challenge bit. In this case, the simultaneous probability of decryption is just 1/2.
Good question.
Yeah.
BC and BB are inconsistent, right?
Right. So yeah, actually that's a good question. Like we can define it so that they're independent. We can define it so that they're identical. In this case, we will focus on the independent challenge bit case. What's oh, that's just a quantum register, a quantum state. So we do them with registers instead of like a density matrix or like a pure state because they can be entangled.
Another quick way to see the question, which is ciphertext here and encryptions are those all classical?
Yeah, exactly. The public key and the ciphertexts are all classical.
So they're not states,
No, like just classical strings.
One question?
Yeah.
So if BB equals to BC, that's it by definition, they are the same. Because
Right.
this is another set.
Yeah.
The security probability is the same. It's still 100%.
Yeah, exactly, because you can still do the same attack, right? Like Bob gets the key, he just decrypts, Charlie randomly guesses, and the success probability in this case is 1/2, right?
So if BB always equals to BC, will you change the proof? Right?
It's still actually a problem to get the identical challenge case. Because that would give us indistinguishable encryption.
Actually, so we can define a third flavor. So we can require that BB and BC are identical. We can even further require that the ciphertexts are identical, right? So the fact that BB and BC are identical doesn't mean that these encryptions are being computed with the same random string. They're not using the same randomness necessarily.
Okay.
So the case where the BB and BC are identical, it still follows from existing constructions, but the case where the ciphertexts are identical, same randomness, as Justin said, that implies unclonable and indistinguishable encryption, and that's an open problem.
Yeah, I get one of the flavors of this. If I use it.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
don't remember the exact one.
I see it. So you said that if we use the fresh randomness, but the
Same challenge bit,
yeah, same challenge bit.
and that's
your construction still satisfied.
I mean, this is a construction from a previous paper, CLLZ 21.
Oh, okay. So are they already satisfied?
Yes, they do 1 to 2 unclonability, and yes, same challenge bit, different randomness. That's still okay. Okay, construction. Okay. So actually, we can take this definition even further. We can define a similar game for functional encryption for functional keys. In this case, Alice queries for functional keys of a functional encryption scheme. Let's say that she queries for some F1 up to FL, and she receives the corresponding functional keys. And we define it so that the first, let's say, L-1 keys are classical functional keys for those functions. And the very last functional key is a copy protected quantum state. And again, we will require Alice to split this functional key into 2 possibly entangled registers that are sent to Bob and Charlie, which are not communicating. And later, again, Bob and Charlie receive their challenge ciphertexts. But here we of course require, as in the usual functional encryption game, you require that fm0 equals fm1 for all the functions f1 up to fl-1. Because those are classical keys, Alice can just send them to both Bob and Charlie, but we require that she cannot split the very last key, which is a copy protected key.
What's the motivation with defining the first reasonably possible instead of one?
The motivation,
Copy protect all.
right? So the motivation is that this is easier, and we will define also the setting where they can be mixed in any way, any order. Right. So far, Alice has been receiving only a single copy protected key, and she was trying to is this not working? Sorry. So far, Alice has been receiving only a single copy protected key, and she was trying to split it into two working keys. We can also generalize this definition to the case where K malicious user could be coming together, and they could be using their K copy protected keys, and they could be trying to produce K+1 or possibly even more keys that are working, and we can define it through this formalization in the form of a security game. So Alice gets the public key and K copy protected keys, and she produces K+1 possibly entangled registers, and we give them to K+1 non-communicating parties, and after the split, they all receive their individual challenge ciphertexts, and we require that they all decrypt their ciphertexts correctly. And similar to the previous case, the baseline success probability is still 1/2, because Alice can hand over the first K parties with K keys, and the last party can just randomly guess. Right, and now we're coming back to Justin's question. So we can also have a setting where Alice can query for multiple functional keys. Some of them could be in the classical mode, some of them could be in the quantum copy protected mode, and she would receive, let's say, up to L functional keys. And if she has queried for K quantum copy protected keys, we require her to produce K+1 possibly entangled registers, and you have K+1 so-called freeloader adversaries. They will try to decrypt their challenge ciphertexts. And similar to the previous case, for the functions that are queried in the classical mode, we require that FM0 equals FM1, because otherwise you can just send that classical key to all the parties, and they can use that to decrypt their challenge ciphertexts.
Nice. So the reason that you were limiting the number of quantum queries before is because it's really tied to the number of parties. You just get one to each one.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right. So let me talk a bit about the previous works. So in the paper that Aaronson introduced the concept of copy protection for programs, he also gives a construction in a structured quantum Alper model for any unlearnable program, and it's K2 K secure in the sense that an adversary that has K copy protected copies of the program cannot produce 2K working programs, but can possibly produce, let's say, 2K-1 working programs. And I guess in the setting aside the structured quantum oracle assumption aside, this is as good as it gets in the sense that we cannot ask for copy protection for learnable programs, because you can just, instead of trying to split your quantum program, you can just interact with it, evaluate it at various points to learn the program, and you can just hand over that classical information to anyone you want. So later, Aaronson et al. Showed how to construct 1-to-2 copy protection for any, again, unlearnable program, this time using a structured classical oracle. Later work of Colangelo et al. Constructed 1-to-2 copy protection for the public key encryption PRF schemes, assuming subexponential IO, long-way functions, and LWE. And again, later Kitagawa and Shimaki, they construct 1-to-2 copy protection for functional keys, assuming the same computational assumptions. And finally, a recent work of Liu et al. Constructs bounded collusion copy protection for, again, PKE, PRFs, signing keys, again, assuming the same computational assumptions. And by bounded collusion, what I mean is that we have K to K plus 1 collusion-resistant copy protection for any polynomial K. But the caveat is that we need to know the collusion-bound K at the time of setup, and we can't increase it later. And the size of the keys and the ciphertexts, everything grows with the collusion-bound K. So this line of work left open the question of constructing collusion-resistant copy protection for actually any primitive in either in Oracle model or from standard assumptions. And in this work, we construct fully collusion-resistant copy protection for PKEs, functional encryption, PRFs, signing keys, based on the same computational assumptions that was made for 1-to-2 secure schemes. Right. And along the way, we also construct we also prove the security of a collusion-resistant monolithic entanglement game. I will come back to that name later. And we construct our schemes through a identity-based encryption technique to construct collusion-resistant copy protection from a 1-to-2 secure scheme. And we use this technique in all of our constructions. And this might be of independent interest. This might be able to give us collusion-resistant copy protection for other primitives also. Also, on a face value, I guess identity-based encryption kind of seems not related to copy protection, but in this case, we show that it helps us construct collusion-resistant schemes. And finally, we construct a classical functional encryption scheme whose master secret key can be punctured at all functions, exponentially many functions, f that satisfy fm0 equals not equals fm1. And one ramification of this is that this allows us to remove the interaction in the functional encryption security game after seeing the challenge ciphertext. If you remember the definition of the usual classical functional encryption game, the adversary queries for multiple functional keys, then it declares 2 challenge messages, then it gets the challenge ciphertext, and after seeing the challenge ciphertext that it's just break, it can keep querying for more functional keys. And this interaction, as you might imagine, creates some problems in the setting of quantum adversaries. So by this construction, it might help us remove that problem. So let me give a quick outline of my talk. First, I will be talking about kill set states and the so-called monogamy of entanglement principle or property that they satisfy. And these states are fundamental in all of the previous unclonable PKE constructions and also in our construction. Then we will start with the 1-to-2 copy protected PKE construction of Colangelo et al. As a warm-up for our construction. And we will move on to the bounded collusion secure construction of Liu et al. Then we will move on to into our solutions. We will start with the so-called collusion-resistant monogamy of entanglement game that we prove secure in our paper. Then, again, as another warm-up, we will give a collusion-resistant copy-protected PKE construction using black box obfuscation. And finally, we will show how to remove the black box obfuscation and just replace it with regular post-quantum indistinguishability obfuscation using IDE. And finally, we will briefly talk about our collusion-resistant functional encryption construction with copy-protected functional keys. So let me start with those states. So we have a subspace A of f2 to the lambda of dimension lambda over 2. And we also have two vectors from the same vector space as S prime. And we define the coset state associated with a SS prime to be the superposition of all the vectors in the coset A plus S with some relative phase that depends on S prime and the elements in the superposition. And we have the following simple fact. You're not going to go through it, but it's really easy to see when you write it down. When you apply quantum Fourier transform to the coset state ASS prime, you get the related coset state A per S prime S, or A per, I mean the orthogonal complement of A, and we switch the order of S and S prime. This will be an important property in the correctness of the schemes that we're going to talk about. So let me start by talking about the monogamy of entanglement property that these coset states satisfy. So in the monogamy of entanglement game, we sample a random subspace A of dimension lambda over 2. We sample random elements SS prime, and we create coset state A SS prime, and we hand it over to Alice. But along with it, we also hand over to Alice the membership checking programs A plus S and A per plus S prime that basically taking a vector B and it outputs 1 or 0 depending on whether or not B is in the coset A plus S or A per plus S prime. We hand them over to Alice in an obfuscated form. And we require that, similar to the copy protection definitions we talked about, we require that Alice creates two possibly entangled quantum registers, R1 or 2, and we hand over to non-communicating parties, Bob and Charlie. And after the split, they also get to learn the subspace A, but they don't learn the vectors SS prime. And finally, we get the vectors B and BC from Bob and Charlie, and we require that VB be in A plus S and VC be in the associated coset A per plus S prime. And Colangelo et al. Conjectured the security of this scheme, and later is proven by Kolf and Mittig. And the security we have is that this probability of these vectors being in the correct cosets simultaneously is subexponentially small in the dimension of the vector space.
The assumption here is we only use ion.
Yes, sorry, I forgot to say that we are using subexponential security to obtain subexponential security for this game. And if you use polynomial secure IO, we can also get the polynomial secure version, but for our constructions and for all the unclonable PK constructions, we need the subexponential secure version. Yeah, so the previous version we talked about, unfortunately, is not directly useful in unclonable primitive constructions. So we defined this so-called multi-channel monogamic entanglement scheme, and this was also implicitly used in the paper of Colangelo et al. To construct unclonable PKE. In this case, we sample multiple coset states, independent. Let's say that we sample L coset states, where L is some parameter, and we give to Alice all of these coset states, along with the associated membership checking programs for all of the cosets. And we again require Alice to split these states into two registers, possibly entangled. And after the split, Bob and Charlie get the descriptions of the subspaces just like before. And this time they also get these independently sampled R1 and R2, their challenge strings, and we require Bob and Charlie to output vectors that are either in the primal coset A plus S or A per plus S prime, depending on whether or not the ith bit of R is 0 or 1. So basically, we are requiring them to output randomly flipped coset vectors depending on this challenge string that they receive only after the split. Right.
Which was the previous.
Yeah.
So in this case, both Bob and Charlie will receive L copies subspace.
Yeah, they're
A1 to
yes, they're independently sampled random subspaces.
and R is
Sorry.
R is a big
Yes, Albert string, and if the ith of R is 0, you'll put a vector in AI plus SI and so on. And R1 and R2 are independently sampled, but actually in this case, you can also prove the security in the case where R1 and R2 are identical.
The one question, so if R1 and R2 are independent, then the previous one is not a special case of this when L is 1. Because the previous one, Bob and Charlie has to upload different segments.
Exactly, yes.
The difference of space means R1, R2 should be complete.
Right. So what's the question like? Are you asking if this follows from the previous one, or the previous one follows from this?
Maybe I just try to understand this thing. So maybe yeah. So maybe my question is why R1 and R2 are independent, not just take the company. So that for each bit, Bob and Charlie has to output different subspaces.
Right. So the thing is, we will use this game on the Unclonable PK construction, where Bob and Charlie will obtain independently sampled ciphertexts, right? So that's how we define the Unclonable PK game. Bob and Charlie both get channel ciphertexts that are independently sampled.
Oh, so that's
R1 and R2 will be inside that ciphertext. And like we cannot require the challenge ciphertexts to have complementary randomness, right? That wouldn't be like natural. Right. So let's talk a bit about the 1-2 secure scheme of Colangelo et al. So the idea is that we will require the user or the adversary to output vectors in either A plus S or A per plus S, depending on some random R, and we will output the message M if they are correct. So basically, that's why we will be able to reduce to the multi-channel MOE game. And the classical secret key of the scheme will be just independent L many independently sampled closed tuples, and the public key will be the membership checking programs that we also had here, and the copy protected secret key will be the L closed states. And to encrypt the message M using our public key, we just output the indistinguishability obfuscation of this program P along with some randomly sampled R. So what our program does is just basically what I described in the first part. We have the message M hard-coded inside. We also have the channel string R hard-coded inside. And this program takes in as input coset vectors, and it verifies if they are in the correct coset according to R. And if all of the vectors are in the correct cosets, we output M. And to give an idea of how to prove the security of the scheme, I guess if you are using black box obfuscation, you can imagine how we can reduce this to the multi-challenge MOE game. Public key is the membership checking programs, which Alice also receives here. And quantum secret key is again the coset state, which Alice receives here. And Alice tries to split this into two. And in the Unclonable PK game, also we will have the quantum secret key and the public key, and Alice will try to split it into two. And later, Bob and Charlie receive programs IOP and R, and again, here in the setting, we have we sampled R1 and R2, and they are record of vectors V that are in the correct cosets according to R. So if we have an adversary that can successfully break the unclonable PKE game, we can just extract the successful queries using black box obfuscation's extractability guarantee, and we will obtain correct vectors for these cosets, and we will be able to reduce the monogamic entanglement game. So when we switch over to indistinguishability obfuscation, it's a bit more tricky because we will no longer have the extractability guarantee, and the adversary is not required to simply query the ciphertext program at various inputs to take the message M. It can try other things. The obfuscation itself might be leaking M. But fortunately, we can still make it work with IO. We just need something called compute and compare obfuscation, which is basically an extractable obfuscation or black box obfuscation for a simple type of function called compute and compare functions. And that's why we will need the LWE assumption. We can construct compute and compare obfuscation using LWE. So now let's move on to the bounded collusion secure construction of Liu et al. So the idea behind it is very simple. We just sample independent secret keys and independent public keys. It's basically a parallel repetition of the previous scheme. And when we are trying to encrypt the message M, we will just encrypt it with all of the K public keys. And since ciphertext will contain the encryption under all the K public keys, even if you have only one of the K secret keys, you can just encrypt your ciphertext. And again, public key is just the membership checking programs for all these coset tuples, and the copy protected key is just one of the copy protected keys for the K underlying independent 1 to 2 secret schemes. And as I said, to encrypt M, you just check for correct coset vectors for one of the coset tuples that is specified by the index I at the input to the program. So if you want to talk about how we can prove this construction secure, I guess on a high level, you can see why it's secure, because if you have K copy protected independent keys, and if you produce K+1 working keys, by Qian principle, 2 of the adversaries must be using one of the initial secure keys. But this is kind of intricate to formalize because they don't necessarily have to select the single copy protected key and try to split that into 2. They can try to do other attacks by using all of the keys at once, for example, or by using some quantum effects like entanglement. However, as shown by the following proof of the et al., actually we can still prove this scheme secure. And the high-level outline of the proof is that what we do is once the adversary has produced K+1 possible candidate keys, we test each of these keys with respect to ciphertext distributions Dj, where we define the ciphertext distribution Di to be the distribution where as you remember, the ciphertexts are K tuples where each of the elements are encryptions under the independent K public keys. And we define the ciphertext distribution Di so that the first I entries are not actually encryptions, but the remaining ones are honest encryptions under the corresponding public keys. So as you can see, D0 will correspond to the honest distribution where he encrypts message M indeed under all of the public keys, and dk does not even contain the message, as you can see. So let's say that we have an adversary that can produce K+1 working keys, which means that they will succeed with respect to the distribution D0. And obviously they cannot succeed with respect to the distribution dk because dk does not contain the message. So this means that for each freeloader adversary J out of the k+1 freeloader adversaries, there will be a corresponding job I sub j between 0 and k plus k minus 1, where the success probabilities of that freeloader for the distribution di versus di plus 1 must differ non-negligibly. Right. And we have k+1 freeloaders. All of them have so-called jumps at some index 0 to k minus 1. So by pigeonhole, this means that for two freeloaders, their jumps must be at the same point. And as you can imagine, a jump between the success probabilities for the distribution di versus di plus 1 means that you've been, I guess, on an informal level, you've been using the I plus 1 secret key, because that's the only place where it differs. So if there's a significant difference, probably you're using the corresponding ciphertext to decrypt. So by pigeonhole, as I said, you will have two freeloaders that use the same secret key. They have the jumps at the same point, so they must be using the same initial 1 to 2 secret key. So we can hopefully reduce it to the security of the key I sub j. So let's talk a bit about how we can generalize these constructions to the setting where we have collusion-resistant security. So for the CLLZ construction, the first construction we saw, there, we have a single coset state tuple, and we encrypt the message using the membership checking programs of that tuple. And our ciphertext is a program that verifies the vectors for that coset state tuple, and it outputs M if you provide it with the correct vectors. So let's imagine for a moment that we have two copies of the coset state for the exact same subspace AI and the vectors si prime. So in this case, let me go back to the definition of the coset state. So as you can see, if we measure the state in the computational basis, we will simply obtain some vector in the coset A plus S, right? So which is what we need to output when the ith bit of the challenge string is 0. But if you look at this fact, if you apply the quantum Fourier transform to our coset state, we obtain the coset state A per S prime S. And if you plug that in here, you will see that measuring this state will give us a vector in the coset A per plus S prime. And that's exactly what we need to output in the setting, in the case where the ith bit of the challenge string is 1. So if we have two copies of the same coset state, we can measure the first one in the computational basis and obtain a vector like this. And for the second one, we can just apply QFT, quantum Fourier transform, and we will measure it and we can obtain a string like this. And since these strings are classical, we can, in fact, copy them as much as we want. So even given two copies for the CLLZ construction, we can create any number of working copies. So it only satisfies 1 to 2 copy protection, but we don't have 2 to 3 copy protection even. So coming back to the second construction, LLQZ's collusion-resistant construction, we have the same problem as CLLZ in the sense that now we have K coset state tuples, but as soon as you're given K plus 1 keys, you will have obtained one of the coset state tuples twice, and you can just measure one of them in the computational basis, one of them in the QFT basis. And again, you will have some classical string that allows you to decrypt any challenge ciphertexts, so you can create as many working keys as you want.
So what is a K password? What is a K?
So K is a parameter of the construction LLQZ. So if you want to achieve K to K+1 collusion resistance, we instantiate this LLQZ scheme with the corresponding K, in which case we sample K many independent cosset state tuples, or K many secret keys of the CLZ construction.
Oh, I see. So basically the previous work that like the sizes will correspond. So it's like proportional to the K. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So if you want K to K+1 security, your scheme will grow
I see.
with like size key. It's, so one option to obtain fully collision resistant scheme from the construction of LLQZ could be that we can sample a new cosset state tuple each time someone asks for a copy protected key. So in the original LLQZ construction, we have some fixed K and we sample K many cosset state tuples, and we can't change it later. One option could be that whenever someone asks for a new key, we can sample a new cosset state tuple. And in this case, hopefully the size of the scheme wouldn't depend on it, wouldn't depend on the collision bound K. However, the problem is that, as you can see, for correctness, our program, ciphertext program, will verify this supplied vectors. It will verify whether or not they're in the correct cosets, depending on R and the index of the cosset state that we are using to decrypt. But if you were to randomly sample a new cosset state tuple whenever someone asks for a key, our public key would also need to be updated, right? Because if someone wants to decrypt using that new secret key, this ciphertext program needs to be able to verify the vectors for that coset. So we would need to update the public key whenever we are handing out a new copy protected secret key. So if we are back to square one, our size will depend on collision bound K. So now we're moving on to our solutions. So first step of our solution is using pseudo-randomly generated coset states. So we will associate each coset state tuple with identity strings from, let's say, lambda with strings. And whenever we are generating a coset state tuple, we will use a PRF to sample with underlying coset tuple instead of sampling them truly randomly. And the advantage of this is that now we can actually sample each new copy protected secret key independently, and we will just need to embed our PRF key inside the public key, and this will only ask for the ID of the coset state tuple that you're trying to use to decrypt, and it will generate the associated coset tuple again. And using this description, it can now verify that the vectors are in the correct cosets for that specific coset tuple we have. And to prove the security of our scheme later, we first define a so-called collusion-resistant monolithic entanglement game. In this case, the challenger and Alice now interact, where Alice asks for multiple coset state tuples by sending over the IDs that it wants to query. And the challenger also sends this program p-mem to Alice. And it's this program that allows for checking membership in any of the coset state tuples. And for each query, challenger also sends to Alice the associated coset state with the queried ID. Now Alice has multiple, let's say, k coset states, and we will require her to split one of them, one that is selected, into two entangled registers, similar to the original monolithic entanglement game. Again, we have Bob and Charlie now communicating. They get the description of the subspaces and not the elements S and S prime for the coset associated with ID star. And they are required to output vectors B that are in the correct cosets for the coset associated with ID star. And the high-level outline of the proof here is that we can reduce this game to the multi-challenge monogamy of entanglement game simply by using adaptively secure PRF or by complexity leveraging. We just need to guess the ID that Alice is gonna select, and coset state tuple we obtained from our own challenger in the multi-challenge MOE game. We can place it in place of the coset associated with ID store, and we will also use a puncturable PRF, and we will be able to reduce the security of the multi-challenge MOE game. Right. So now let's talk about our first warm-up construction using black box obfuscation. So what we do is to generate a new copy-protected secret key, we simply sample a random ID and we output the coset state tuple associated with it. And to encrypt the ciphertext, we again create a obfuscated program that takes in some ID and also vectors, and it verifies those vectors according to the coset associated with ID and according to R. And if the verification passes, we output message M. And this is the membership checking program we have from the collusion-resistant MOE game. As I said, whenever we are sampling a new protected key, we just sample a random ID and we output the coset state associated with that ID. So the I guess the high-level outline for the security of this scheme is that with overwhelming probability, we will have that all of the k identity streams obtained by adversary will be unique, and the adversary has only oracle access to PRF because you only give it the black box obfuscated program EMAM, which has k in it, and we also give it the coset states for various IDs that we sample the IDs here. Other than that, the adversary does not have access to the PRF key. So by the security of the PRF scheme, you will have that all the coset state tuples will look random to the computational bounded adversary. And previous to the similar to the previous constructions, we can then reduce the security of this PKE game to the security of the monogamy of entanglement game. So we still have two challenges. First of them is the same problem as the bounded collusion setting, where you need to formalize the fact that the adversary must be splitting one of the keys into two rather than doing some other kind of attack, maybe using quantum effects that employs all of its k keys at the same time. But this is possible to solve using the technique that we talked about from the paper of Leo et al. And the second and the more important problem is that you're using black box obfuscation, and we would like to start using more standard assumption like post-quantum IO. So now, let's say that instead of black box obfuscation, we're using just IO to obfuscate this membership checking program, which will be our public key and the ciphertext programs. So in this case, no, you will no longer be able to claim that the cosets obtained by the adversary are pseudo-random because the adversary in some form has the PRF key itself. Because this is no longer a black box obfuscation, we just have IO here for PMM, which has the PRF key hard-coded inside. And another thing is we are using, again, IO for this ciphertext program. So instead of just honestly running it at various inputs to be able to obtain M, the adversary might be breaking some other part of the scheme. The IO might be leaking M itself. So we will need to make some other arguments. So one way we can one way we can try is, which is what we do classically usually, we can try to puncture the PRF key at the identities that we are interested in. So let's say that the identities of the K keys that the adversary has obtained are ID1 up to IDK. We can try to puncture the PRF key K at all of these points, in which case the keys obtained by the adversary will again be random looking or pseudo-random process state tuples. But doing this takes us back to square one because now the size of the membership checking program needs to depend on K. Because as you remember, in the IO arguments, moving between two different programs, they need to be padded to the same size. And if you puncture the PRF key at K points, you will need to pad our programs to a size that depends on K. Also, even if we somehow manage this problem, you still have the other problem that I talked about. The encryption program, the ciphertext program is still also an IO program, so it might be leaking in a different way. So now we move on to our second step of our solution, which is using identity-based encryption. So now we will change our programs. Our public key, the membership checking program is still the same, but we change our ciphertext program so that instead of just outputting M in the clear, it now outputs the ID encryption of M under the ID that you're running it with. So let's say that you have some secret key or cosset state tuple associated with some ID, and previously you would provide that ID and the cosset vectors to this program, and you would obtain M. This time you obtain an ID encryption of M under the same ID that you're using. So during key generation, we now also generate the ID key associated with that ID, with the same ID as the cosset state. And we also output this classical secret key as part of our protected, copy protected secret key. So we still have a small problem here. An encryption is a randomized functionality, whereas you're using IO here, which needs a deterministic program. But we can simply solve this by using a PRF. Whenever we're encrypting under some ID, we also use the some other PRF evaluation under ID as the randomness for this encryption. So to give a quick outline of our proof technique, so this will be similar to the proof of the bounded collusion setting. So what we were doing is we were testing each of the K+1 adversaries with respect to some ciphertext distributions, and we observed that there will be different jump points between the success probabilities for each preloaders, but by pigeonhole principle, two of the preloaders must jump at the same point, which means that A will be, you can conclude that they are using the same initial key. So here the problem is that we can try something similar. We can define various ciphertext distributions, DJ, where let's say that we run a program on some ID, and if the ID is smaller than this threshold J, we will encrypt nothing. In the other case, we will actually encrypt the message, similar to the bounded closure setting. However, the problem is that we have exponentially many identity streams. We will have exponentially many distributions DJ, but we still have the fact that D0 is the honest ciphertext distribution, and the last one corresponds to the ciphertext distribution, where we don't actually have the message inside the ciphertext, and the adversaries cannot succeed. So the question is, can we still do kind of like a pigeonhole argument in the setting where we have k+1 adversaries? They all jump at different points, and those points are in this very large set consisting of 2 to the lambda elements. And this is where the ID comes into play. So observe that when we are moving from DJ to DJ+1, the only thing that changes inside this program is its output at the point ID equals J. Previously, it was outputting an encryption of M. Now it's outputting an encryption of per. However, the thing is that you can see that the adversary that has obtained K copy protected keys only obtains K IB secret keys. Let's say that they're associated with ID1 up to IDK. Then by the security of the ID scheme, note that since it won't have a secret key for most of the IDs, it won't be able to detect this change between DJ and DJ+1, because again, we're not outputting per versus A, and we're outputting encryption of per versus encryption of M under identity J. So then by the IB security, we can conclude that for each freeloader, jump happens at one of the IDs that it has obtained, and they have obtained K identities via K+1 freeloaders. So we again have a result where 2 of the freeloaders must be using this same initial closed state. And our functional encryption with copy protected functional keys construction is quite similar. Now, when we're generating a key, now instead of just a random identity ID, we also have the function f as part of the key. What I mean is that if you're querying a copy protected key for the function f, you have the coset state associated with ID concatenate f, and you have the ID key for ID concatenate f. And our ciphertext program will take ID and f, and it will output an evaluation of M under F, and it will encrypt it under the identity ID concatenate F. And here we still need actually this random ID, because the reason is that we allow the adversary to query for the same function multiple times. And as you can probably see, if you didn't have this random ID, if you queried for the same function f twice, you would have obtained the same coset state twice, and then you can just measure it as we talked about before. And the proof idea is quite similar to the PKE case. We have a moving threshold, and again, the adversary will obtain various ID secret keys. The difference here is that the adversary can also query some classical functional keys, in which case it also obtains the ID key for the corresponding ID. But for those values, we will, by the definition of the FE game, we will have FM0 equals FM1. So jumps cannot happen at those points either, because at those points we will be moving between FM0 and FM1. How much time do we have?
Was everyone to see it?
I mean, it's typically if I said, but I feel like.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yes. Yeah. So at the beginning, I also defined this I also talked about this so-called functional encryption, where we can function the master secret key at all functions f such that f does not allow differentiating between f0 and f1. And this is something we give along the way, as I said, to remove the interaction for the quantum adversaries that we have in the Unclonable FE game. So let me quickly talk about our definition and our construction. So in the functional encryption game, just like the usual FE game, the adversary queries for various functional keys by sending over various functions f1 up to fl. And after the first query phase, it outputs two challenge messages n0 and 1, such that they are not different under the functions that it has queried for. And then usually in the normal FE game, we would give the adversary the challenge ciphertext, and then after seeing the challenge ciphertext, it could query for more functional keys. In this case, we give it a punctured master secret key that is punctured at M0 and M1, and then after that, we can give it this challenge ciphertext, and the adversary needs to output a guess for the challenge bit. And as you can see in this case, we won't need to have the key query phase after the challenge ciphertext, because by the correctness of the punctured master secret key, we will require that it outputs a working functional key for all functions f, as long as it does not allow differentiating between M0 and M1. And that's exactly the functions that it was allowed to query for in the usual FE game. And our construction is quite similar to the unclonable key and FE constructions we talked about. So to encrypt the function, so to encrypt the message, we output this obfuscated program that takes in some function, and it outputs the ID encryption of the evaluation of the message under that function, and it encrypts it under the ID scheme under the identity F. And intuitively, this will have the following ramification. If you have queried for some functions f1 up to fl, you will only have the ID keys for those functions. So even if you query this ciphertext program under different functions, in this part we will first still compute fm, but you will only obtain the ID encryption of that evaluation under a identity for which you don't have a secret key. Maybe the more interesting part is the puncturing part. To puncture a master secret key, we simply embed the master secret key inside an obfuscated program, and you can obtain a functional key for any function f. Using this program, you simply run it on f, and it first verifies if indeed f is allowed to, if this secret key is allowed to produce a functional key for f, and if so, you output the secret key for the identity f, and our security proof will basically puncture this ID key for at various identities, and we will be able to include the security of our scheme. That was it. Thank you for listening. Any questions? Thanks.